everybody. I'm completely delighted to be here, and thanks to John Phelan for inviting me. I thought I'd just say a very brief few words about Connect to start, just to show you, I suppose, the perspective that I'm coming to this event from. So if I had to say in a sentence what Connect is, it's a one-stop shop for all networks and communications research in Ireland. So we're spread right across the country in 10 different locations, and we take a kind of complete end-to-end perspective. So we design sensors, we design radios, but we also design the networks and the services and applications that sit in them. And there's about 200 researchers. So when I was asked to speak today, I'd have to say I think about connectivity a lot and how things are connected, and I think to a certain extent feeds into this panel then quite well. We work very, very closely with a range of companies. We do what are called targeted projects. They're targeted to the company's needs and specially designed to pursue research topics at the speed the company wants. And I suppose if I was to start off and make my first observation of the trends, and I think it's a trend everybody knows, many companies are kind of reinventing themselves as IoT companies. And you see that a lot, and you see many of the big names like Intel talking about IoT and lots of small startup companies as well. So it's a very interesting time for IoT. Okay, John asked me today to talk about kind of major trends and insights. And I came across this article in the New York Times about a week ago. It takes up actually about cars, which Lauren was already talking about. But I think it's a very, very interesting article. And they're kind of, the main point there is that kind of mainstream car manufacturer Toyota is investing in Uber, and everyone here probably knows Uber and Halo and those kinds of companies. And the article also referenced the fact that Volkswagen has invested in Get, a similar thing to Uber, and GM invested in Lyft. And essentially what you're seeing here is a major trend where, I suppose, if you want to call it kind of an old-fashioned or mainstream car companies are actually now looking at kind of totally different entities and investing in them. So I want to kind of unpack this and what this means in the context of trends and what it means for people interested here in IoT businesses. So I suppose the first thing that these companies are on a trajectory. They're on a very clear trajectory where they know, I suppose if you want to put it like this, their cards are marked. And down there in the future, and who knows exactly when, is the completely automated driverless car. It's a very disruptive trajectory. If you think about how we think about cars now and individual ownership and prestige around cars, it's completely changing that. But I think by investing in Uber and investing in Lyft, the companies are saying, okay, things are changing. People are changing their attitude about what we own and what we share. And we need to move on that trajectory. So they're also on the trajectory for many of the reasons that Lauren mentioned, where cars are much more automated now, they're much more connected, they have all sorts of smart devices in them. And I think essentially what you see by that New York Times article is them realizing that it's not just about the technology, but it's about the business models and how they're changing and how they need to get into bed with different kind of partners to move to that long-term goal. So while that's long-term, I think a very clear transition is already happening. So as I mentioned already, the cars themselves, if you look at any car now, it's usually kitted out with all sorts of connected devices. In the first instance, you have all sorts of ways of checking what's happening in the car. You have the car connected to the internet. You have all sorts of other things happening. So this digital transition has begun already and is fairly well established in some car manufacturers. And the key point here is not specifically about the car or the car company, is that we're in an era where it is actually all about the digitization of the vertical. So whether you're talking about health, or whether you're talking about agriculture, or whether you're talking about smart cities, everything now is about how do I digitize that vertical I sit in, and how do I make that transition to a fully digital world. And I think you see these car companies doing it in a way where they start in the obvious IoT way, but now they're thinking further. The key thing here is that it's no longer about playing into one market. It's about playing into multiple digital markets. And I think this is a point that I think is really, really crucial. So if you think of a car, it's not just a product that's a car that you want to buy. We see IoT allowing you to play into the insurance market. If you install certain things in your cars or use certain apps, you actually get cheaper insurance. We see it playing into the parts management, as Lauren spoke about, service maintenance. We see it playing into utilities, where you can think of connected cars and platoons, managing also, for example, petrol reserves and when things should be bought and stored and where. You see it playing into the asset sharing, and not just Uber. Cars can also start acting as their own base stations or monitors for other things. And you see it playing into the entertainment market. And this is what's really, really crucial. You're not talking about one market, you're talking about multiple markets. And I think really, really important, it's not business as usual. That's a really, really big trend. So I think the main thing to think here is when you talk about things and the Internet of Things and connectivity, you're actually putting different kind of pressures on the network. So one of the different pressures on the network you saw emerging as Vodafone spoke about the NB-IoT. So there's a need for devices to be connected that need low power, that need long battery lives that you can deploy and forget. That's very, very different from what we'd experienced up to now. The other kind of pressures you see when you look at these big, huge, I suppose, offerings with the connected cars, the connected to the landscape around them, they exert huge pressures in the amount of spectrum they need. And some of the research we've done has shown that if we continue with business as normal, these kind of applications will use all the spectrum that's out there, which is not actually a viable full-time solution. So it's about doing things differently. And here's an example I just included about doing things differently. It's a French consortium called Aguerre. They no longer think in terms of traditional operator. They want to provide connectivity for airports and trains and motorways. And the way they're thinking about it is not that I go and engage with my traditional operator. I make my own consortium. I create my own network. It's designed exactly for the things on my network. And I don't go the traditional route. So what I would say, if you look at the IoT world today, if you look at where it's about finding that trajectory. It's about making the decision to transition to the digital in all that means. You know, not just because I'm digitally marketing something. And more importantly, it's about not thinking of a product as an individual thing that you kind of play into one market. It's really, really important to play into multiple markets. And I think I'd go as far to say that, in fact, you will only succeed in the IoT world if you think of that thing in those multiple markets rather than just one that you might initially think of as a starting off point. And it's about accepting that it's not business as usual. This is kind of challenging to do, and for people who've heard me speak before, they'll have always heard me say it's about testing the future in Ireland. So sometimes you can't just do these things by thinking or, you know, by doing analysis. We're very much in Connect about building networks. One of our current test beds is called Pervasive Nation. It's a nationwide, low-powered, wide area test bed. It's currently centered around the LoRa flavor. But we recognize as well that it's not business as usual. And one of the key things that's happening in this space at the moment is that everyone is fighting. The fight is on to see who's going to dominate and win and what kind of networks are going to provide the connectivity, who's going to be the operator and what they're going to look like. So there's all sorts of different flavors. NB-IoT, as Lauren mentioned, LoRa, as we have RPMA, which is another flavor from Ingenue. And really, as I said, the fight is on for this. It's a very exciting time because there's lots to kind of, I suppose, explore. So what we're doing in our network is we're allowing that fight to play out within the network. So we have the LoRa flavor that we think is a really strong way to go. We have new flavors of low-powered wide area. All of these are suited for low-powered small messages that you need to deploy and forget, long battery life in awkward spots. And we also, I think, are very, very keen on the NB-IoT, and we have a flavor of this, a software radio version of this. Software radio is our background in the network as well. So what this allows you to do is, from an end-to-end perspective, to take the network apart, to challenge the business models, to try different technologies and that connectivity, to do it at nationwide scale, and to say to yourself, what is my trajectory? How do I play in this space? How many digital markets can I play into by kind of exploring and seeing where I'm going for you know, and how do I do things in a new way? Because for me, as I keep saying, it's not business as usual. There's a whole new world out there. A lot of what we're used to is being challenged, turned on its head. You know, things are being offered in totally new ways. And I suppose the final message to me is, you know, there's so many opportunities in the IoT space. We're delighted for people to come and play with us in that space. We already have smart agriculture, smart city, flood monitoring, and all sorts of different applications in the test bed, and we welcome many more. So thank you very much for listening.
Linda, thank you kindly.